Good afternoon, and welcome back to INSA's week-long New IC Empowering Women and Engaging Men Virtual Symposium. Today's session is Empowering the Next Generation of Female Leaders. Now please welcome INSA President Suzanne Wilson-Heckenberg.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the fourth year and day number 3 of the New IC. Today, we'll hear about the power of mentorship. Earlier this week, our panel of female trailblazers described their experiences breaking down barriers and earning the proverbial seat at the table. Yesterday, as part of the conversation around how our community is moving the needle of inclusion, diversity, and belonging, the importance of mentors came up. Megan Flannery Hayes noted that being invited to the table is also about having the confidence to take that seat and how that's a hard role for some to take on. A mentor, she said, can help you gain that confidence to speak up when others are silent and be that counter view that goes against the group think. And importantly, to realize that you have that great new perspective and you add value to your team. A good mentor can be a powerful boost to a person's confidence and career. I am fortunate to have had both men and women as mentors throughout my career, and I'm hopeful that I can pay it forward, as many of you all will do as well. I think Megan's insights are a perfect scene setter for today's discussion, but before we begin, just a few housekeeping notes. We hope to make today as interactive as possible. If you have questions, please submit them through the screen on the right hand of your computer. This is a reminder that this program is on the record and open to the press. And finally, I would like to thank our sponsors for their critical support of this program, particularly Esri. It is my pleasure to welcome Patty Mims, Director of Global National Government for Esri, who will introduce our moderator today. Patty, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Suzanne, and good afternoon. We are delighted to be a sponsor today. And as many people know, Esri was founded in 1969 by a husband and wife team, Jack and Laura Dangerman. Our company is based on the foundation of empowering leaders, both female and male. We need to be able to enable our next generation of female leaders to not only be successful, but be given the tools to be confident, to be trailblazers like Suzanne just talked about, to be entrepreneurs. Then one thing that is consistent is change, and supporting this next generation to be a change is key. So we can improve, we can create, and we can be better in this ever-evolving world. I'm very excited about the panel today. Now it gives me great pleasure to introduce our moderator, Lindy Kaiser, who is the Director of Content and PR at clearancejobs.com, the largest career site for individuals with an active federal security clearance. Welcome, Lindy. In this capacity, she manages their editorial team and content assets, including news, white papers, webinars, and multimedia, as well as PR, outreach, partnerships, strategic partnerships, and earned media. You do everything, Lindy. I love it. She's also the moderator of the INSA Foundation Future of the IC Workforce Videocast series. So welcome, Lindy. Over to you.
Thank you so much to Patty and to Esri for sponsoring this, and also to INSA and to Suzanne and the whole team there. They have done such an amazing job this week. I have loved joining in and listening in on the other sessions, and I really feel like we're a part of the big show here today, because mentorship and allyship and community have really come up in all of the other conversations, and that's what we're going to talk about for the next hour. So we hope we get a lot of great questions coming in, a lot of people connecting over this topic. And again, like INSA does a great job of launching these series to get the conversation started. So we hope you'll take the things that you learn and talk about today and continue to talk about them in your offices. So I'm so excited to introduce an amazing panel of incredible women who are all working in organizations that are helping to advance the national security workforce, and specifically adding more diversity into the national security workforce. So if you're wondering, hey, how do I find a mentor? How do I get involved? Organizations like INSA and organizations that are being run and led by the 4 women we're talking to today are an amazing place to start. So on that note, I kind of want to launch in and ask each of our panelists a question. Just how did you get your start in the national security space? And then also, how is the organization or that you're representing today help to get new women involved and embracing and in the national security space? So I'm going to start with Caroline and then go to Caroline, Lauren, Katie, and Lindsay. you can't remember the order, we'll figure it out. But start with you, Caroline, and just talk about how you got your start in NatSec and what your organization is doing to get more women there.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm happy and excited to be here today. I retired from the Army after spending 30 years there. I retired as a colonel. The first half of my career I spent as a military police officer, and the second half I spent as a military diplomat in a field we call foreign area officer. The Department of Defense recognizes that we need military personnel to work in international environments. So foreign area officers are regionally focused experts in political and military operations, and we have political, economic, and geographic awareness, as well as foreign language proficiency. So I served in several embassies in Slovakia, in Norway, Serbia. I also worked at NATO, and coordinated with the UN, African Union, and European Union. So today I also represent WCAPS, of Women of Color Advancing Peace and Security. And the mission there is to sort of redefine national security and be inclusive of women who have traditionally been left out of the national security arena. And so we are organized according to working groups. I chair the Defense and Intelligence Working Group, and there's several other working groups. Our founder and former executive director is Ambassador Bonnie Jenkins, and she is like the epitome of inclusive leadership and how you can further amplify the voices of women of color.
Amazing. And now Katie, same question.
Sure. So hi, everyone. My name's Katie Knockin. It's just so great to be here with all of you today. I definitely want to give a special thank you to Suzanne and Toya, Noelle and Rachel, and just all of the INSA team for organizing just such a great event year after year. And of course, to you, Lindy, for moderating this afternoon. It's just really special to be here with such amazing women and leaders. So to the first part of your question about just kind of how I became interested in national security, I think my answer might kind of echo others' experiences, which is that it was kind of by accident and largely unexpected. I grew up in the American Southwest in Arizona, very far from any discussion of foreign policy or national security. And I had actually aimed to study neuroscience in college. And, I didn't even make it a week on campus until I had kind of my moment, right? As we all kind of do, we have these small moments that kind of shift our universe a little bit and change our trajectory. And I remember walking across campus with a soccer teammate of mine who told me that she was majoring in something called political science. And, I had never heard those words next to each other in my entire life. So, my response was something to the extent of like, oh, well, like, what is that, right? And so, I think I hadn't even realized that studying governments and their relationships between them was something that was really even in the realm of the possible. And so with a presidential election, my freshman year, I ended up majoring in political science and just kind of fell in love with it, and the rest is history. But I think my experience as kind of an outsider falling into this career really fuels my motivation to, exactly like you said, Lindy, build a national security community that better represents the America that we exist to protect. So, all that to say, I don't want to make it sound like getting into the national security community was easy. There were a million moments between that single conversation and getting my first blue badge. And I really do emphasize with anyone who is currently in that waiting phase, and if that's you, please hang in there. You will get to the light at the end of the tunnel, and we really do need you. So to the second part of your question, about a year and a half ago, I co-founded the Command Purpose Foundation, which is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that supports military veteran women who are transitioning from active duty service to the civilian world. So this organization is just really special to me and my co-founder, Erin, because it's really grounded in our individual transition kind of experiences that we shared with one another when we met several years ago. Hers from the active duty military to the civilian world, and mine from kind of a student into the working professional world. And our mission at its core really is to bridge this kind of ever-growing civil military divide by helping veteran women successfully reintegrate professionally after they separate from active duty. And so really, what we say we're trying to do is just scale the relationship that we had with one another. So we do this by helping our members really redefine their purpose and value, and in a new civilian environment, which, as we all know, can be incredibly ambiguous and challenging, and ultimately reclaim their command presence in the civilian world, which we believe is really rooted in a strong sense of purpose and sense of self. So many of our members have aspirations to continue working the national security mission after separating from the military, but really regardless, we believe our workforce is really missing out on incredible female veteran talent, and we aim to fix that and ultimately to enable women veterans to assume positions as leaders and mentors in pillars in our society.
Awesome. If you're playing moderator bingo, I already mispronounced one name and screwed up the order that I promised to deliver these remarks in. So over to you, Lauren. Same question.
Oh my goodness, that's wonderful. My name is Lauren Buitt. I founded Girl Security, but just briefly how I got into national security. Like Katie, I grew up in rural Illinois, and I was a junior in college when September 11th happened, and I went back to Illinois looking for a job in political science, much to my parents' chagrin. And I was hired by a national security think tank. I had no idea what national security was, and I spent about 10 years trying to figure out what precisely national security was. And I'm pretty sure my parents thought the organization was a cover for something for like the first 5 years of that employment. But I always kind of say that I'm the moral of the story with Girl Security. I didn't know how to advance my own career. I didn't really understand how the field was laid out. I wanted to remain in Illinois. My brother was deployed to Iraq. And I just faced some personal hurdles with respect to trying to advance myself in that space. And so Girl Security is in part the outgrowth of my experience, but I think it's the experience of many, which is if you're a girl or a young woman, or we also advance gender minorities as well, and you don't exist in a space where national security careers are accessible, our organization is committed to forging equity in national security, which is about much more than just advancing girls and women in numbers. It's also about reshaping the ways, much like some of our partners as well, and how we define national security and advance those ideals through the lens of underrepresented organizations or underrepresented populations in the national security space.
Awesome. Now, Lindsay.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. This is really great. So I sort of have the opposite story, which is that I sort of knew early in college that like something national security, the words national security didn't exist because Lauren and I are exactly the same age. My junior year was September 11th. But I knew that something foreign, interesting, government, maybe spying on people, maybe defense oriented was a thing that was of interest to me. And so for the folks in the audience who like sometimes hear these career panels or things on mentorship where it's like people say it all happens by serendipity, like I was someone who really wanted to plan out a career and like pursued it on purpose. So that exists too in the world. And it's weird to say that you do these things on purpose. You're not supposed to say that, but it's true for me. And I feel like, you know, it's true for other people too. And so I went to grad school, and I went to grad school to study international security policy after majoring in math and public policy as an undergrad, right? Like a very sort of linear, very clear what I want to do. I did the internships, right? DIA, DOD, the Hill, focusing on armed services. And so I got really broad exposure to what the different agencies are, what they might do. And that was really, really, really helpful. By the end of grad school though, I felt like I still didn't quite understand how to break in. And I know there's like a mess of different fellowships and they're all very confusing and they all only take like 2 people. And so if there are a gajillion applicants for all of them, you have a 0% chance of getting any of them. And like, you know, I very much felt like I was up against that as well. And so I remember going to one of my professors whose name was Dr. Ash Carter and saying like, I don't know, I think I'm just going to join the military. And his response was like, oh, you don't need to do that. And I thought that was very interesting for a future SecDef to say. And I think really what he meant was like, I know this seems hard and it's like really opaque, but the military is not the only entry to public service. And there's a lot of folks who talk about, you know, sort of the veterans' preference entree into federal service as being like one very clear path. And it's true, it exists. I served in the Marine Corps on active duty for 8 years. I'm still in the reserves. I loved it. It was a great fit for me. I'm glad I did it despite his advice that I didn't need to and that it wasn't, you know, going to be the fastest path to career advancement. It was a really good fit for me. But joining the Marine Corps is not a good fit for everybody. And it's a very special sort of place for certain people, and it's a really bad choice for other people. So for me, it was great, and I loved it, and I'm happy to speak more about that. But then, you know, Katie's foundation is really inspiring and speaks to me, because then you've got to transition out and sort of figure out how you're going to translate what you did into whatever the next phase is. And right now I have the great honor of leading the Leadership Council for Women in National Security. It is an organization that was founded 2 years ago by women who are fairly senior in the national security space. Many of them have held really senior positions as ambassadors, very senior military retirees, a lot of political appointees who've served at the Deputy Assistant Secretary or above level. And they were all meeting kind of socially as a community of support and griping with each other about why it's still really, really hard for women to ascend to national security leadership positions. And, you know, it's been 40 years since we've been working on pipeline and, you know, bringing women into the field. And so we should be at parity by now if we had grown everyone in an equitable way. And so their theory of change is to have our little organization focus on lifting up the other organizations that are doing a lot of pipeline work and whatever we can do to support that. But our organization is really focused on this question of putting women in leadership roles. And that if you really change the face of leadership at the top, if we got to 50-50 parity tomorrow, which of course, you know, we may not get there, but we're actually doing pretty well right now, that you'd start to see organizations change. You'd start to see the way that leadership is executed throughout an organization and throughout the hierarchy changing in ways that are meaningful and that are more inclusive all throughout the pipeline. So that's the Leadership Council for Women in National Security, lcwins.org. It's been a great honor leading it for the last year and a half, and I'm really excited about the stuff to come.
Yeah, check out all these sites at INSA Online, get plugged in, get connected. What I love is the diversity of voices speaking into this and how all of these organizations are doing really cool, amazing things. So yeah, if you're joining us, tweet about what's happening. It's on the record, Suzanne said. So let's talk about how amazing these organizations and women are. Quote them heavily. Don't quote me because I'm going to misspeak 500 more times. But I love that we're launching this conversation. If you have a question, send it over now. Don't wait for me to get through mine. We would love to hear from you. Northrop Grumman is the audience engagement sponsor here. So thank you to Northrop Grumman. I love how there are a lot of companies. You know, we saw ESRI, we saw a lot of the defense industry is really getting behind this topic. I think the number of initiatives around diversity and getting women's voices engaged, creating opportunities for mentorship are really key. And I love that, again, I'm clearance jobs, so a career story gets my heart every time. But the path into a national security career doesn't always look the same. It can be military service, it can be college, it can be, we're even seeing a lot of non-traditional paths outside of the typical college track being pursued. So I think that's really important to highlight. If you have a passion about something, the government needs you somewhere. So don't, as has already come up, don't opt yourself out for any reason. So again, I'm a content person, so I got to define the terms, define the relationship. How is it important? How important is it, ladies, to define the relationship? Mentorship. Like, I think that's always key. Sometimes we get wrapped up behind this, like, it's a little awkward to ask somebody to be your mentor. It's a conversation I've never had, but I have asked for help constantly. I need a lot of help. So that's just like, can you talk a little bit about how some of the best mentorships you've had have formed? How do you encourage other women to pursue those? Do you think it's worth asking? Do you need to say, hey, mentor me? Or will people get it if you just say, hey, can you help me with something? I'll start with you, Lindsay, on that, and then we'll go around the horn again if anybody wants to chime in.
So similarly, I don't have anyone in my life who I have ever used the word mentor and assigned that to them. I have been a part of mentor matching programs. Girl Security is one of them, where I've had really wonderful and meaningful relationships with mentees and been assigned as a mentor to people. But I think, so I'll speak from my own personal capacity on the mentee side as opposed to the mentor side. I have not had any conversation like that but I have reached out for help many, many, many times to many people. And as I look back, the type of help that I got gave me all of the things that one might be seeking from mentorship. So I think, you know, that kind of defined the relationship conversation. My advice there would, having never had one of them before, is one, you know, take away the significance of many people don't have these conversations, so it may not be necessary. But also, like, what is it that you are seeking from that person? If what you're seeking is like a really well-defined, long-standing relationship with someone that fits a mentorship model, then maybe that conversation is useful to you. It may be scary, frankly. I really want to give advice that is useful to folks. The benefit of an organization like Girl Security or like others that create these mentor matching programs is that they define the terms without the mentee needing to define the terms for their relationship. So the mentor knows what they're getting them into. I don't think I've had anyone approach me just randomly and say, will you be my mentor? If they did, it would really depend on who they are and in what context, whether that might be weird, frankly. And not because I wouldn't be willing to provide longstanding support to someone, but I think, you know, you really would have to define terms and understand what it means. And I'm not sure that it's necessary or the most helpful. For LC Wins, we've been doing a lot of sort of soul searching on what this means and what women are lacking in our field that's preventing them from sort of taking that big next jump into leadership. And there are a couple of gaps that I think the word mentorship is supposed to fill, but because mentorship's like this big blob that we don't really define, that, you know, people are using it in different ways. One is inside scoop, right? Like I'm in this organization, I'm in the Marine Corps, I don't understand what my fitness report's supposed to look like, and there are certain tricks of the trade. And if you have really good senior leadership, and it can be different people every time, it doesn't have to be the same person, but if you have input from people who know better than you do about how to do things well, that inside baseball type stuff, that's really necessary. That maybe doesn't have to come from one person, but that's like one thing that mentorship can really provide. Another thing, and I'm not going to belabor all the different definitions, but one other thing that I want to highlight is a lot of times what people mean is actually sponsorship or championing. What they mean is, I want you to get me my next job, and I want you, when you get a really cool, very senior job, to bring me in as your special assistant, or like the lower down version, and like take me along with you in your career. And because I think we see men doing this all the time for each other, right? I mean, there's a really strong example of that. And that's a really tough thing to do by asking a question about defining a relationship. That's something that really happens primarily between people and previous subordinates, right? Like, so-and-so has worked for me in the past. They've done really excellent work. I trust them. If I move on to something big and fancy next, I would want to bring them with me because I know that they would do good work for me there. The way to do that is not to go seek out mentors, but to perform really well for the purpose of people you currently serve with, and to find other opportunities to do similar types of work, right? So like through external associations or doing project work for people and building those relationships with senior people where they know and trust your work and know and trust you as an individual. And so you may, you know, but that's different than like the kind of standard mentorship relationship. Okay, you let me go first, so I've drone on for too long. But those are just some of my preliminary thoughts about this mentorship question. I think what mentorship can give is really, really important, but at least from my experience, you can get it from a lot of different places and piece it together in a way that fits what you need. You may not need the relationship defining question.
Well, Lauren, you came up, you're the expert. You make this happen for the girl security community. So tell us more. Do you need to define the relationship? Do they need to know that they're a mentor?
I think if you really want to drive diversity, equity, inclusion, relationship-based models really work, because oftentimes if you don't have access to people or opportunities or resources, having a dedicated space surrounded by supportive and trained people who understand trauma and understand equity and understand the history of a particular region of girls with whom you might be working, I think having that kind of defined approach is really important. And again, our intervention point is, you know, really starting at middle through with a keen focus on upper high school into early undergrad. And we work with very diverse populations that come to the table with a lot of unique challenges. And so for us, that type of structure is really critical. But then, of course, through partnerships with some of the folks on the call, we're able to then set them up for a better chance of success once they're moving through their undergraduate space. And I think, you know, for myself, when I think about my mentors, one of whom probably is more well known in national security, Suzanne Spalding. She was a mentor very early on to me as a young woman in the space in national security law. But then I also had a male mentor, Al Hanna, who died last year, who was very much a divergent thinker and taught me about running a business ethically and with integrity. So I think, to Lindsay's point, as one advances, there may be more of those, as one of our board members, Camille Stewart, says, mentoring moments, you know, those kind of informal engagements that you have. But I do think much of the data, especially on foundations and organizations that work on upward mobility and upskilling for underrepresented groups, that relationship-based series of pathways approach, I think, is quite crucial. And I think even within the own population that we serve, teenagers are coming up with a whole set of different challenges that we will never know. We will never know and really understand the ways in which they're experiencing trauma, the ways in which they socialize, the ways in which education needs to change to adapt to their needs. And so I think we gain as much from the girls in our program. In a way, they mentor us because they're really kind of driving the organization as much as we are making decisions to help further what they're doing. So just to put a fine point on it, I think defining the relationship helps early on.
Okay, Katie, any opinions on formal versus informal mentorship?
Yeah, I think my opinion has changed probably 5 times since hearing some of the other answers on the call. But you know, I think I think the way mentorship looks for you really depends. I think, Lindsay, you said this, on what you're trying to achieve with the relationship, right, and the people involved. But I think in my own experience, my mentorship relationships have developed and kind of been maintained more organically rather than like in a documented or official way. And I think allowing that openness has really kind of allowed those relationships to grow in unexpected ways and take on kind of lives of their own. But I think, you know, for me personally, some of my best mentorship relationships, those I learn and take away the most from, have come through another organization that many of us know and love called AWIC, or Amazing Women of the Intelligence Community, which, as many of you know, is a grassroots membership organization for women in the intelligence community. And what some of you might not know is that AWIC was actually founded as a reverse mentorship organization by senior women who sought to create a space where they could learn from more junior women, which is actually a pretty radical concept that now I and, you know, hundreds of others have reaped the benefits of. And our latest partnership with Girl Security is just one example of ways that we've continued to expand on that idea. But one of the reasons why I love the AWIC mentorship model is because it kind of creates this untraditional mentorship relationship that flows in both directions, like Lauren had mentioned. And what I mean by that is, you know, in many cases, there's not really a formal mentor-mentee, in that we both kind of enter into these conversations intending to mentor and be mentored simultaneously. You know, there's always something that each of us can teach and learn from one another. And I personally, as a mentor, often find that I actually learn more from, you know, being asked to reflect on my own experiences and articulate my own experiences than when I'm kind of asking another person about their own. So in my experience, it's actually kind of been some of those more unstructured, untraditional mentorship relationships that have offered me the greatest benefits, both as a mentor and mentee.
I love that. And now, Carolyn, back to you. Do you have any thoughts on the mentor, formal, informal?
I think mentorship is extremely important. Unfortunately, I did not have a mentor during my 30-year career. However, there were people who were interested in my success and who gave me advice along the way. But I didn't have that one person to kind of guide my career. And quite honestly, most of my friends and a lot of them who look like me, we didn't have those mentors also. So, you know, there were a few people, senior people, that I would have that I could go and bounce ideas off, especially when I had to have difficult conversations. And say, for instance, I had a conversation once with one of my senior guys, and we were military police officers. And after collecting weeks of statistics, I talked to him about the fact that we had an image problem with the community. We did not look like the people we were policing, the soldiers we were policing. And so I talked to him about diversifying our forces from within, like when we made traffic stops and like when we confiscated drugs and things like that, to have different people, different gender and different racial composition there. So having people that I could talk to and trust were very helpful doing that. But other than that, I kind of winged it and talked a lot to the other females who usually were other minority females who weren't being mentored either. And one good thing about the Army is that they have clear guidelines and directions about what's your next step, what schools you need, that sort of thing like that. So we constantly exchange information among ourselves, and we mentored each other. So, and basically I kind of made a career out of going places that people did not want to go. And if I had different requirements for success, then I made sure that I didn't care where I went, as long as I had that job that I needed to get to the next level. So yeah, a lot of good advice along the way. I think it's very important. WCAPS does an excellent job. They have a formal mentorship program. I have, and they match different mentors with mentees. I have 2 women that I currently mentor, even though sometimes I'm not sure whether I'm doing the mentoring or they're doing the mentoring, because I learn as much from them as they learn from me. So it's very important. It's also very important. You can have mentors of different races and genders and background, but I think you also need to have someone who undergoes experiences the same as you do, so they can kind of talk to you along the way. And so I think mentorship is important. I think it's lacking a lot with minority communities, but so that's why we need organizations like WCAPS that are focused on ensuring that you have those, that you can benefit from those experiences from senior people within the organization.
Now, I love what you bring up there is like peer-to-peer mentoring is big too. I think sometimes we think of it as like there's somebody, it needs to be somebody senior. And that certainly, especially trying to get a promotion in the Pentagon, that senior leader mentor helps. But if you're looking to just advance your career, if you're working for, SAIC or Northrop Grumman or a company here, those peer-to-peer networks and groups can establish mentorship and collaboration that can really progress your career. So I think that's a great point. We had a question come in from Nora, speaking my love language here. She's talking about personal brand. So, which I gotta love in the NatSec space. How important is your personal brand when establishing yourself in a career? She said she had a mentor recommend that to her. So I think that applies, and I think that's another good question too. I've had great advice from mentors, and I've had maybe not great advice from mentors. So maybe how do you be a discerning mentee? And then how important is personal branding? Katie, you want to kick us off with that one?
Sure. So there were 2 parts to your question. Do you mind repeating it? I heard the personal branding part, and I had already started jotting down my thoughts.
Branding, and so it's Nora's asking, she got advice to work on her personal brand. So I think sometimes, how do you filter advice that comes from a mentor? Because I will say there's points in my career that I had to be super discerning. I will say I honestly had people that I wondered if they were giving me good advice even people who I loved. So I think, how do you be a discerning person? So obviously everybody needs to work on their personal brand. I mean, go to Clearance Jobs, we'll show you how to set up a profile, do a lot. But how do you then kind of filter the advice that's coming in from a mentor? Because she's saying, hey, my mentor told me to do this. Do you recommend it as well? I don't know you, Nora. So we don't really know. You can send me an email, but what do you think, Katie?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think this is actually kind of linked to what Carolyn was talking about with having a diversity of mentors, right? This is one of the reasons why this is really important, because, as helpful as mentors can be, it's really only one input into your decision-making process, right? So it's important to remember that no matter how amazing our mentors are, their advice or our advice is often grounded in our own experiences and our own biases and our own perspectives, right? And it's okay to receive advice from a mentor and decide to take a different path. And, really that diversity of perspectives just kind of helps ensure that you have all the information, all the pros and the cons and the different outlooks, so that when you're ready to make a decision, ultimately it's the right decision for you. And so, one thing to mention here as well that is kind of related is something that I don't think we talk about nearly enough when we talk about mentoring. And it's something that I learned from my work with Command Purpose, which is this idea of self-mentorship, right? There is no mentor in the world who can tell you what you care most about, right? That has to come from you. And oftentimes that doesn't come from your brain, right? It kind of comes from your gut, which can be really, really uncomfortable. But mentorship can be helpful, I think, in helping us identify steps or milestones or paths to reach some of our goals, but that purpose and that end destination really has to start with you. So, I'd recommend asking yourself questions like, you know, what do I really care about that I maybe can't totally explain? Or like, what do I read when I'm off the clock? And if it's fiction, that's okay. You know, what is that idea maybe that keeps coming back to me or resurfacing, but that scares me a little bit because I don't quite know what to do with it yet, right? Like that's the really good stuff, right? And that's where these powerful things like imagination and innovation are really born. So every once in a while, sometimes it can help. Mentors can absolutely be helpful in kind of helping you chart your path, but maybe ask yourself the questions that you would ask a mentor as well, because a lot of times we have a lot of inner wisdom, more inner wisdom than we might expect.
Lauren, did you have something on that too? I saw you nodding your head some.
I was thinking, I don't even know what personal brand means, and I don't mean that to offend you, Nora, but I've failed at branding myself historically. But what I would say is, I think what Katie said was so eloquent about that sense of self-reflection. And I mean, the only advice that I give girls in our program is be yourself, have integrity, protect your relationships. I think at the end of the day, people who work hard and believe in the purpose of their mission and network with the intent of building robust relationships, not necessarily seeking out opportunities, not to say that there's anything wrong with that, but I think, you know, your guiding principles will be the values that you have now. But I failed branding wholly and entirely.
So we had another question come in I think is really relevant. So Robert asks about if you're a senior level person and you want to be a mentor, like you want to help your junior staff, but you feel like if you just start shouting from the rooftops, hey, open for mentors, put your shackle on the door, you're gonna get overwhelmed with people and you can't help everybody that comes to you. So maybe can you speak to that, Carolyn? Like if you're a person that has a lot of experience and you want to mentor somebody else, how do you identify the people that you can help the most or people that need the most help from you?
Let me see. I think you really have to be selective and look at a few different things. Look in terms of what that person's energy is, what their motivations, if they have a purpose in life, how you can actually add to that. And then what you have to contribute to that person, because perhaps you feel like you don't have certain skill sets of basically what they need, even though I find like one of the ladies that I'm mentoring right now, I can kind of give her general advice because she's self-motivating. She'll kind of go out and find things. So I think you have to be selected in who you choose, because if there's somebody who just wants you to mentor them and they aren't willing to go out and do the work themselves, then I don't think that's a good fit for me. I need someone that knows inside, deep inside, that they have the wherewithal to go out and do something. They just need encouragement, they need some direction, but they're actually going to take the reins and do it. And sometimes I find that you'll have people and they really want you to pour into them, but they don't really have any idea. And you don't have to know exactly. Sometimes you know you want more than you already have, but you don't know exactly what that is, but you're willing to go out and explore it and find information. So that's the type of person that I would pick. Once in a while, I've had someone pick me, and I wouldn't exactly say no, because I'm thinking, okay, perhaps they see something in me that they think they can connect with, and I'll work with them, but I'll still try to motivate them to go out and do most of the work and do things. So that's how I would select someone, based on their motivation, what I can encourage them to do, and how we'd be a good fit for each other.
Lindsay, I saw you nodding your head at one point. Was there something there? How do you think more senior people can select the people that most need their help?
So I 100% agree with everything Carolyn said. I've had many people reach out to me who like don't really even know why they're reaching out, right? So they're like, I want to have a coffee, and so we do it, and I try to help them and answer their questions, but they're not necessarily either following through on the leads that they already have, or asking specific questions, right? Like they haven't really thought through ahead of time, like, okay, I'm trying to obtain answers to certain questions from this human being. Like, how am I going to use this time effectively or efficiently? You know, I have people say to me things like, tell me about your career. I'd love to hear about your career. And like, I'm super happy to talk about myself for the half an hour, but But I don't feel like that gets them what they were seeking out of the experience, and they could like look on LinkedIn and then have some really targeted questions. And that might be a better use of our time. So, so trying to figure out who's sort of ready for it, I think, is part of it. The other thing, I would give advice to anyone who's sort of seeking to be a good mentor or ally to look where you are first. Because the best type of the two like really helpful forms of mentorship that I highlighted, that inside information that people need, wherever you are, the subordinates or the subordinates of subordinates within your organization are the people you're going to be best equipped to give the most specific information to. And then especially women and people of color are not often sought out for that type of mentorship. It doesn't happen as naturally as the sort of informal relationship building that might happen among people who are in whatever the majority population is of a certain organization. So thinking about being really proactive and offering, not being sort of, I mean, people have to want it, but just really being there and being supportive of the folks who are in your community who might benefit from that, I think would be better than like blasting out on Twitter, like whoever wants mentorship can have it.
Iced latte. No, sorry.
And if I have like for 2 seconds on the personal brand thing, I actually think that that's interesting. I would say a couple of things. I'm like taking advantage of the spotlight and answering the previous question too. But one is, if you're talking to a mentor, like understand your audience, but being honest with yourself about what you're trying to achieve and what your real goals are will be important, right? In the Marine Corps, I got some really great mentorship about how to become a colonel in the Marine Corps, but I got out as major. And so like their mentorship was not going to be a good fit for where I was going in my career, and really being honest about where you're going and what you might want is going to be important. And when you do make a career transition, you do need to think about your personal brand, and personal brand does not need to be icky the way that I think some people think it might be. It's really about like, if somebody looks at your resume really fast, what are the first 2 or 3 adjectives that they would use to describe you? And is that what they want, what you want them to take away? And if it's not, then you need to rethink how you're presenting yourself, right? I know when I came on board with LC Wins that they're like, oh, Marine lady, like that's going to be a part of the face of LC Wins, right? And if they don't want a Marine to be their spokesperson, they're not going to hire me, and I can't do anything about that. That's in my background, and that's fine. I'm proud of it. But that's going to be a part of my personal brand. And so thinking through that, I think, is really helpful, especially for cross-sector changes, right? Like within an organization, I think you can be more nuanced, but when you're trying to transition between like, military or government and nonprofits, whatever, that's when people will start to try and sort of figure out who you are. And it's important not to be put in a box, but it's also important to understand the realities of how people are going to perceive you.
Yeah, no, I think that's good advice and good to consider. And political rules apply. So I'm the moderator here. It's like a political debate. If I ask a dumb question, just answer what I should have asked. You're all brilliant women. That's why INSA picked you, not for, so do your thing. This segues well, the political thing. A new administration comes in, opens up new opportunities for roles. Brittany asks, how are organizations like WCAPS and LC Win specifically? She threw you guys under the bus. You're welcome, Brittany. How are you helping put people into positions with the administration or filling openings that come up? And I think that's big, I'd say it's a huge question we continue to get. Big on mentorship. People really want to know how to break into the space. Like, how do you get that seat at the table? Maybe how does mentorship and how do your organization specifically help people prepare their resume, prepare their background, get into those positions? Carolyn, do you want to launch?
Sure. As far as WCAPS goes, we do a lot of work in that area. We've even partnered with LC Wins because I remember receiving a survey and, pending the election for women to kind of determine and volunteer what the areas of interest and expertise were. We also have different within our working groups, we have like resume writing. Right now, our international development working group has a foreign service type training preparation for that, questions. And so we really utilize our membership. We have personnel who work for USAID, for State Department and several different organizations. And so we have women, we train them on writing, you know, big on writing, policy briefs and things like that. We just published a set of policy briefs when the Biden administration was about to take their place. We had a whole list of policy recommendations for their first 100 days. So we have several things. And like I said, we have the mentorship, we have resume building, we get job opportunities and internship opportunities on a regular basis. So there's several things that we're doing to provide services to our membership. So.
Great. Anybody else? How to train people into these positions? Even Lauren, maybe you could speak to that as far as like, what are some of the things that you're trying to get? Because that's huge in our recruitment space. I mean, Lockheed Martin is trying to recruit middle schoolers into their positions because we need to fill those positions. How do you get people? You need to prepare them, onboard them early. Because if they decide they want to work for SpaceX, I mean, you're always competing against it. How do you get young people energized?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're kind of at the front end of, I don't really even like the word pipeline, but we're at the front end of the preparation period for girls and young women. And what we really do is take high-level skill building and scaffold it for those interested in national security's pathways so that when they hit the field, they feel confident to have participated in programming that is exciting and dynamic and accessible. But also, I mean, I think what we also try to do is demystify the idea that the skill set that they need is inaccessible. So the foundation of our program is really to say you already have the skills that you need to excel in national security, whether that is as an intel analyst or as a policy leader or as a national security lawyer or in human rights and development. The way that we frame our message is that those skill sets like critical thinking and analytical skills and collaboration and innovation and ethical thinking, those are all skills that girls already have. So we're trying to build their confidence at the front end. So again, that when they kind of hit the playing field as they move throughout their careers, they have that confidence sooner as opposed to being in their mid-career and kind of seeking out those opportunities, which I think if you look at a lot of the pipeline data around when young women exit the field, it is between that either that early to mid or the mid to senior, when of course there's, not unaccommodating policies around family leave and so forth. So ours is really kind of skill building and community building, again, through partnerships with AWIC and WCAPS, is building that kind of social network, that community space of peer mentors as well to carry them throughout their careers. Because I think what we often hear from senior women in our network is that they didn't have that peer network that Caroline talked about as well, of those you could go to and say, hey, I'm looking at this opportunity, or I have a question about this or that. So we're kind of front loading all of that so that they're not waiting until later on to develop those resources.
Yeah, and another common theme is reading, and I love what both you, Lauren, and Carolyn have said about being prepared for kind of opportunities too. So if you want to work in the Biden administration, you better know the policy positions of the Biden administration. It never ceases to amaze me sometimes, like the Capitol Hill interns all kind of, I've worked on Capitol Hill before, so I'll talk to young people and they'll be like, oh, I interned with my congressman. They asked me about immigration policies. How was I supposed to read the website before you apply? I mean, just baseline. If you're in high school or college and you're trying to get your first government job, a little bit of reading can go a long way. But little things like that are things I think mentors can provide that information. And we kind of, if we progress in our career, assume it, but assume nothing when you're dealing with a young person who's interested in this career path. So another good question that came in, I think would be good for Katie. Somebody talked about how, Carolyn mentioned the progression from the military. So if you're a captain in the military, you can look up to the colonel and maybe find a mentor there. Within the intelligence community or broader NatSec, again, we talk, and Lauren just mentioned the lattice is more the framework now. So how do you kind of look for mentors or network when you don't necessarily, does the IC need to embrace more linear career progression? Maybe that's a question too. Or how do we create a framework that shows people where to connect? I ask questions that aren't really questions, Katie. Have you figured that out so far? So just let's talk.
That's totally fine. So I think that's actually what you've hit on is part of what makes the transition into the working world, whether you're moving there from the military into the civilian world, or whether you're moving from a student to the civilian world, it makes that so difficult, right? Because it is ambiguous and it isn't as hierarchical. And even though in the government, you have maybe these official processes and structures, actually really it's all based on personal relationships, right? And especially in a community like ours, open source research only gets you so far. You really have to find people who are really on the ground, right? Who are actually doing the work. So, surprisingly, I've actually had pretty good luck in actually like reaching out using tools like LinkedIn, for example, like finding people who have cool jobs and just kind of reaching out to them and asking to connect and hear more about their experience. Using networks like INSA, right, or like AWIC, or like all the networks of all these women on this call, to really build real relationships. We always joke when we have somebody new come to one of our AWIC happy hours, we care just as much about what your dog's name is as we do about what your career goals are, right? 10 to 20 years from now. So really like focus on who we are as people. I think, in a community like this where people care so deeply about our work, the personal and the professional really, I think, mix a little bit more than I think maybe in other careers. So really getting to know people as people, right? And of course, never leaving a conversation with someone new without asking to be introduced maybe to someone else based on your conversation. So those are just a couple maybe more tangible takeaways for me.
No, I love that. And I think that springs into the next question here about kind of how do we're breaking out of COVID, as you kind of talked about. So we've learned to do a lot of things really well virtually over the past 1 or 2 years. Carolyn's smiling, like some of us well, some of us not as well. I don't know. INSA's doing a fabulous job with all of their events. Hat tip to them. They've kept the conversation going. So we have all these webinars. I think that can facilitate mentorship, because now you don't necessarily, it used to be, I had to reach out and touch you leadership, reach out and touch you mentorship if I couldn't see you. Now, like you said, Katie, you can reach out online or build networks with people that aren't necessarily located. But is it good to have a blend? Because I think we're also still missing some of that. So maybe talk about maybe structurally the role interplay between coworkers, the internal or external to your organization. I'm pretending I'm asking a question. We're just talking to you people. Lindsay, talk to me. Where do you find these people? How do you connect? How do you make the kumbaya between I'm virtually networking, let's schedule a Zoom, please buy me an iced latte. If you want to mentor me, you're gonna have to buy me an iced latte, people, if you want 30 minutes of my time. I'm just joking. Lindsay?
So like, again, I didn't mean to create this sort of like thing that I carry through the whole time, but if we're talking about the mentorship, like getting information that you need about getting ahead, there's so many, the proliferation of online content has meant that there's a webinar for everything. And so including places like INSA, where like you might not think that there's an open source webinar about advancement in the IC, but I promise you there's some stuff out there that will be very, very helpful. And so the ability to do mentorship at scale, I think, is really advanced through this technology. And I think that's really great. And it's just a question of figuring out where that stuff is and going and getting it. What I think has become, so that's easier in some ways, is getting that information. What's harder is building those types of really solid relationships that turn into sponsorship and championing and bringing people along with you, because those are really, it's just harder to build them in a remote environment. Like there's no water cooler talk, right? Like I realize after 8 to 10 hours of working at my desk, I'm so much more exhausted in the home environment because I don't take breaks. I'm not like, when I reflect back on what I was like in the office, like I was screwing around for like half the day, just talking about random stuff and then doing some more email and then turning to the person next to me being like, did you see that online thing? And I don't have anyone to turn to and say that and get those like brain breaks. But while you're doing that, even though it seems stupid at the time, you're building those relationships. And even though, I do have staff and we do build relationships over Zoom, it's just, there is like a little bit of that connectivity that's missing, and it's very deliberate. So you don't get those informal connections with the folks who aren't directly in your chain, right? You're not bumping into each other and building those kinds of relationships. And those strong relationships that you can build over time, those are the ones that are going to manifest for the sponsoring and the championing and that kind of stuff. So we need to find other ways to do it, and we need to double down on it when we can all meet back in person, which is why everyone's going to be going to tons of parties starting like tomorrow. And that's great. But everyone needs to be back.
Go to the INSA party tomorrow happening. If you're in DC, I think you can still register. I don't know that for sure, but go ahead, show up at the door. Anyway, we're down to our last 5 minutes. I probably have to ask the last question. So this is kind of the lightning round. We will go just around the horn, open-ended, which is perfect since I don't ask coherent questions anyway. Thank you for the audience for submitting yours. Thank you to Northrop Grumman who sponsored that. If you didn't get your question answered, again, the benefit of me managing content is I will respond to any of those later after the fact. So join in with your questions. We'll connect with these ladies and connect with them with that information. So if you still have questions for them, and you don't want me to ask it publicly, now's your chance to ask your private questions and I'll submit it to them. So I want to go around the horn, starting with you, Caroline, and then going down. I want to ask you if there's anything that we didn't address or talk about today that you wanted to chime in. So just your final thoughts on mentorship. Carol and Lauren, Katie, wrap up with Lindsay.
Okay, in terms of mentorship, I think it's important for the individual that you're mentoring to know themselves. And I think that's the most important thing for me in going out to life and having the career. If you don't know yourself, you don't understand your own strengths, your ability, your own sense of specialness, then people will definitely try to redefine and tell you who you are and what you're not capable of doing. So if I had one thing that I wanted to leave with a mentee, it's like, find out who you are and what makes you tick and what bigger thing outside of yourself you're tied to spiritually that keeps you grounded so that you know who you are. So that's the most important thing, knowing who you are.
Same question, Lauren.
I would just say, I think, we're very much working on the long lens. Teenagers are using technology. So I do think having dual modalities is something that we need to continue to see across industries, but specifically in national security. But I also think that if you're in a position where you can cultivate a culture of mentorship as opposed to, one-off programs, it can be extremely rewarding. And it's something that I think requires a lot of trust and a lot of consistency. But if you can put that infrastructure in place in your own organization, there's tremendous benefit to creating a really dynamic culture. And then I think separately, organizations like Girl Security and others were dedicated to mentoring. So if you don't feel comfortable being mentored inside your organization, which we hear a lot from, find external organizations that really are dedicated to that sole thing of mentoring and make sure that you succeed.
Katie.
Sure. So I think, when I reflect on what I have been most grateful for in the mentorship relationships that I have, it's really creating an environment, both as a mentee and a mentor, that allows people to kind of be this like messy, unpolished version of themselves. I think there's a lot of pressure, especially on young people when they go into a mentorship conversation, to feel like they really kind of have to have all the answers, right? And the mentors that I really cherish are the ones who I can go to when I'm just still working through something or struggling. And, the best mentors care just as much about your promotions and job offers and successes as they do about the stuff that lives kind of in between those moments that sometimes gets lost when we look back, but has really incredible educational value. So I would just say, for mentors and mentees both, just having the courage to really just be your authentic self in those conversations. It can feel, especially in a professional environment, like you have to put on this professional face, but you get much, much more out of those relationships when you're just your authentic self.
Lightning round, Lindsay.
I would say don't be shy. I think women in particular can feel really apprehensive about reaching out, especially to men in senior roles, but in general, and feeling like soliciting advice, articulating maybe their ambition, right? Like I want to be a leader one day. How do I do that? That can be really uncomfortable for women. And just like there's like an online dating component to all of this, like reach out. The risk is low. The rejection is not a thing, right? If somebody doesn't respond, there are a gajillion reasons why they might not respond. None of them are personal to you. And there won't be a consequence for you ultimately. So if you have a question, if you're seeking advice, if you think that you would benefit from interacting with someone, just reach out. And if they can't do it, they can't do it. No worries. And if they can, then you may be really better off for it.
That's it. For you, Suzanne. Did we make it? We made it.
Lindy, you were terrific, by the way. That was some outstanding moderating. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Lindy.
Okay, I was waiting for somebody to unmute my button. I am smiling because there were so many great takeaways from, your colleagues knowing the names of your pets, to just show up at the IMSA party. Again, it's going to be a party. Looking forward to seeing a lot of folks. And then also being your authentic self. I do think that's such an important part of networking and mentoring. Thank you, Lindy, for moderating and for being your authentic self. Wouldn't trade you for the world. And to Lauren and Carolyn, Lindsay, and Katie for sharing your stories today. Based on the Q&As that we've received, it's obvious people greatly value the insights shared by this panel. And once again, shout out to my friend Patty and Esri, as well as our other sponsors who made today's programming possible. If you were late to today's program, the links will be available to all the attendees and emailed out, and then the session recordings will be available next week. Looking ahead, tomorrow at 2, Lieutenant General Mary O'Brien, Air Force Deputy Chief of Staff for ISR and Cyber Effects Operations, will deliver keynote remarks, followed by a moderated Q&A with former PDD&I Sue Gordon. And if you were unable to get your questions answered thus far in our programming, show up tomorrow. There'll be a lot of our panelists and former panelists from the years past in attendance at Grand Cru Wine Bar in Arlington. And I hope to see you all there. It promises to be a memorable evening. And finally, on Friday, join me as we close out our conversations of the week with the CIO of CIA, Julie Galina, and her sister, Chris Lovejoy, who is the global head of cybersecurity for Ernst & Young. Quite a powerful sisterly duo. They'll share their experiences rising to senior positions, as well as the importance of strong female role models in their lives and the enduring bonds of sisterhood. And with that, today's program is adjourned. Stay safe and healthy, and I look forward to seeing many of you all at 2 o'clock sharp tomorrow. Thanks again.